Hi, everybody. Welcome back to the Resilient Aging Unfiltered podcast. We have a very special guest today, Rick D'Amico. Hi, Rick. Thanks for joining. You are very well known around here and in many places, but I will give your brief bio first and then we'll jump in.
Okay.
Rick D'Amico retired in August of 2016 at the height of his popularity from the #1 morning television news show in Phoenix. His Emmy-Award-winning broadcasting career spanned over 50 years in radio and television and print. In January of 2016, Rick's wife, Ruth, was diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease, and Rick decided to retire and stay home and take care of her. They were married in 1969, 53 years of marriage with 4 children, twin boys and 2 daughters and 1 granddaughter. And Ruth, his wife, passed away on October 21st, 2022 after suffering from Alzheimer's and Lewy body dementia complicated by COVID-19. Rick has authored 2 books, his first chronicling his 50-year career in radio and television broadcasting, called It Just Wasn't Perfect for Me. And the second book was about caring for his wife while she suffered from Alzheimer's. And that one's called How Alzheimer's Stole My Wife and Shattered Our Dreams. Those are available on Amazon. Well, I first met Rick and Ruth when I was working as a memory specialist physician in my last job. And that was, I think, in 2018. Saw part of the course of how things evolved and felt honored to work with both of you in that setting and help you out, hopefully. And maybe we can start with, many people know you in Arizona and in other places for your career as a news broadcaster and a trusted voice. And wondering, how did that role and that identity shape what was happening for you privately with your wife when she was first diagnosed and you were facing Alzheimer's together?
Well, when she was officially diagnosed, that was January of 2016, I decided then that I was going to retire so that I could stay home and take care of Ruth. And I immediately thought, of course, I would be available to her within a month or so at home. It took longer for me to retire. I shared the information with my co-anchor at the time. It was Andrea Robinson. We were very close and remain close to this day. I finally told my boss what I was doing, and he held me there at work till August of 2016. So in August of 2016 was my last day on the air doing the morning show, and they made a big deal about it. And they had all these show business and politicians, sports stars, governor, and all that come on and talk and wish me well. But the thing that was really fun about it was Ruth was with me on that show. And she sat at the couch with us and, kind of helped out on the show, and everybody was coming to pay their respects. And that was August of 2016. However, I did not reveal that the reason that I was retiring was because Ruth had Alzheimer's. And I don't know, she didn't want me to say that, to preserve her dignity. And it isn't anything that we were willing to reveal to the public. So I kept that secret for a couple of years.
Mm-hmm. And so would you have, if she hadn't been experiencing that, would you have retired then, or you would have kept working in that job?
Oh, well, I was getting ready. It's a real drag to wake up at 4:00 in the morning and be happy for 3-4 hours a day every day. You try to feel interested in everybody you're interviewing. But I thought maybe they were wanting me to stay. My boss wanted me to hang on there for another 3 or 4 years, and I probably would have stayed for another 3-year contract. I thought it was just the right time. I wanted to be with Ruth, so I made that decision.
And how was that transition for you?
The transition from being on the air and off the air?
Yeah.
Well, it was real easy because I was very busy, because I became Ruth's full-time caregiver, 7 days a week, 24/7. And it was really revealing. I spoke a couple times to the Arizona Caregiver Coalition, which is kind of like a quasi-state organization. And the question is that people ask me, and still frequently ask me, is what does a caregiver do? And I thought, if you can imagine this, a caregiver, imagine what you have to do for yourself from the moment you wake up in the morning to the moment you go to bed at night. Everything that you have to do for yourself, you have to do for your loved one.
Mhm.
And, had to get Ruth out of bed in the morning as time progressed. I mean, early on in 2016, she really was able to care for herself, but it was around maybe 2017, 2018 where it was really rough. So, I'd have to get her up in the morning. I'd have to take her in the bathroom and disrobe her and clean her,
Mhm.
take a shower, get her dressed, I used to put her makeup on every day because I know a little bit about that being in television,
Yeah.
and go down for breakfast. I just was with her, 24 hours a day,
Mm.
7 days a week. So I was really busy, taking care of her. So the transition wasn't that I was sitting around looking for attention because I was giving all my attention to Ruth.
I see. So in 2016, obviously her needs evolved or increased over time.
Right.
Um, but there was even plenty to do at that point in 2016.
c- Right.
Okay.
We were, I guess I should say that the backstory of this is when I met Ruth, we met in a radio station in Ashtabula, Ohio, a little
Hmm.
town in eastern Ohio. It was radio and TV. And so that's when I fell in love with her. The story I always tell is we met in a revolving door and we've been going around ever since. But the fact of the matter is, I was walking down a hallway and she opened the door right into my face. So she was part of that radio station. So she was part of that, that culture of broadcasting. We got married in 1969.
Mm.
And so she accepted the fact that radio was a weird kind of business to be in and it was transient and you were going to be moving from time to time. So in that first 16 years or so of my radio career before I got into television, I had, I don't know, 9 or 10, 11 different jobs. And she came with me, of course, wherever we went. Period of time, she was a secretary at the radio station, a receptionist, and she was an executive secretary to a publisher of a daily newspaper. She became a reporter and a society page editor of a morning newspaper. She had all these great jobs. When we moved, we moved to Battle Creek, Michigan. She was a legal secretary. She worked in the engineering department of Post Division of Post Division of General Foods cereals. We were
Mm.
the first family in the United States to eat Pop Rocks. That's that candy that pops in your mouth. They experimented with that, decided not to do it.
Whoa.
So she worked at all these places. She was executive secretary of a national health and exercise equipment manufacturing company. She was always willing to go to, wherever we went. She was willing to take these jobs and learn from them. And she was hired and did very well. So she was very bright, very intelligent, had a great sense of a curiosity, and very well liked and very well loved. So because that she took that on, I just concentrated on my career, which I regret. So she did everything for the family. She answered the phone. She took care of all the problems with the kids at school. She paid all the bills. When I used to do the morning show, my co-anchors used to say, she's probably home mowing the lawn. And she was. She did mow the lawn. She was like that.
Yeah.
And because of the fact that she handled all that, I was able to concentrate on my career. When I was doing the morning show, I was either on the air doing the morning show or thinking about doing the morning show. That's how it consumes you.
Mhm.
So little by little things started to pop up, which send out red flags. And that's when, a credit card was refused that I used because the bill
Mhm.
was paid. I could tell you a story. This is honest to God's truth. One day I was sitting at home convalescing from an operation, surgical procedure, and all the power in the house went out. And I looked out the window and the APS man was there disconnecting the power. And that's back in the days when they used to do that. Now it's all automated. But I went out and I said, well, what's going on? And he said, well, he says, I hate to do this. He said, this usually doesn't happen unless you're 3 or 4 months behind on your power bill. And he says, we have to disconnect it. You're going to have to call the company and get it back. So I immediately called Ruth. I said, Ruth, they just disconnected the power. And she said, oh, I thought I paid that bill.
Mhm.
So little over time, this was happening. And I remember one day when I was visiting some very close friends of ours in Litchfield Park, and I said, I would like to live here. And my friend there, who was a city manager at the time, said, well, I'll set you up with our realtor. So I got together with the realtor. I said, I'd like to look for a house in this neighborhood. She said, well, I'll get back with you in a couple of days. And she called me a couple of days later. She said, you have no credit. She said, you haven't been paying your mortgage payments.
No.
And I said, geez. So, this was happening over time. And
Mhm.
it was startling to me because I always made very good income working in television news. And there were times when we had conversations where friends would should just stop in the middle of a sentence and couldn't compete.
Mhm.
So then when I became a caregiver, I also became the manager of all these things that I had to do. I had to,
Mm.
pay the mortgage, get all the bills up to date, take care of the school kids and all that stuff. And it was a real challenge. And that was kind of busy.
Yeah, fair enough. Got it. When was that about? So she was diagnosed in 2016, and when were like these bill paying issues happening? Was it shortly before that?
Yeah, it was shortly before that. Right.
Mhm.
And in 2015, I was driving to work one morning and I was in a head on collision. Lady crossed the center line. There was a warrant out for her arrest. She was high and it wasn't my fault. And so I got concussion and I was seeing a neurologist. And the test you put us poor people through that just drives you nuts, and all the lines you
Yes.
have to draw and everything. And they confirmed that I had a concussion. And I said, my wife, I think she needs one of these tests too. So we
Mm.
set her up to go through the process and the examination. And so it was in January of 2016 when we met with the neurologist and he said, you have Alzheimer's, Lewy body dementia. So that was
Wow.
terrible for her. And I asked, well, what do we do now? And he said, well, make an appointment for next year. Oh, I kind of left thinking, how bad could this be if there's nothing to do for a year? So he made an appointment the following year, 2017, and he said it had progressed a little more and come back and see us in another year. And that's when I decided that we had to change and get
Yeah.
involved in, other treatment and other activities.
So I'm thinking about that time period leading up to the official diagnosis. Usually I'm thinking about like other family members who are now maybe in your shoes and they're
Right.
noticing things. And from what I often hear, those things are noticed frequently for years before, for different reasons, the person gets evaluated. Were you noticing for years, and were you worried? Or I'm curious like what was going on in there in your mind and your heart because of those. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Well, Dr. Ali Atri, who I think you were associated with, was talking with him once. I was doing a seminar over there at the Sun City Research
Banner,
Area,
Sun Health.
and he said that Alzheimer's can appear in the brain as early as 25 years before diagnosis. Around the year 2000, 2001, which would be 15 years before diagnosis, I kind of felt that there was a loss of connection
Hmm.
with me and Ruth. It's kind of a loss of, we weren't necessarily connected. We weren't kind of jiving together, kind of a loss of acuity in what our thoughts were. I
Mm-hmm.
kind of thought I was losing her. And I actually put this in my book because I thought that maybe she didn't love me anymore.
Hmm.
Yeah, she was disinterested and thought maybe I might even have to get a divorce. I was really worried about that. And so there was that loss and there were, arguments and we went through a period where we just weren't getting along. And I
And
also come to find out later that that's kind of common. As a matter of fact, you just reminded me of something. I was with Ruth at a caregiver seminar, one of those caregiver meetings where they call them memory cafes
Mhm.
where the patient or loved one is separated and they go off and do crafts or whatever. And the caregivers sit around a coffee table or a conference table and talk. And one caregiver told me, she said, well, I divorced my husband 10 years ago. And I said, really? And you're here taking care of your husband now? She said, yeah. And then I also talked to Ruth's physical therapist who told me the same thing. She said, my mom and dad divorced. And then 10 years, 5 or 10 years later, I don't know the time period, they got back together again when they found out that he had dementia and Alzheimer's.
Mm.
So it could be, I don't know, not conversing with studies on this, but it could be a cause of separation and divorce among couples.
That's really fascinating, especially since it was like 15 years pretty much before she was diagnosed.
Right.
And I'm assuming there wasn't any clear precipitator for that would have led you to have some increased strain or nothing, maybe nothing obvious.
Right.
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 And I can imagine so you were married at that point for over 30 years.
Right. Yeah.
And I'd love to dig into this more because I think this is really important for people to hear. because of course there's little things happening over those decades. And
Right.
that is a really fascinating one that isn't about cognition. It's not about memory or organizing. It's about this, what I maybe might call, you can correct this, but like an emotional connection or the way you're probably have been accustomed to, you know what each other is thinking, you know how to finish your sentences, you know,
Exactly.
and like anticipate how the other will respond to whatever the situation is. And it sounds like that changed. Is that accurate?
Absolutely. It's like a loss of emotional connection, emotional acuity, where she wasn't being able to be on the same thought process, same thought level, share the same values that we had over time. It was just kind of
Mhm.
slowly becoming a stranger, so to speak.
Did you talk to her directly about that at the time?
No, one thing I do regret is over that period of time, especially during my time during the morning show, and I did the morning show at Channel 10 for the 20 years before I retired, is that I was so wrapped up in my career and so wrapped up in that show and so wrapped up in every. One of the challenges of doing the morning show is that they'll throw stuff at you live when you're on live television and you have no idea
Mhm.
what it's going to be yet. I think we may have talked about this earlier,
Yeah.
but if, for example, they would have a planning meeting and they would say tomorrow morning at 7:15, you're going to talk with Snoop Dogg, about his latest
Yeah.
record. And right at 7:14, they get that little thing in your ear, and the producers say, "We canceled that. You're going to talk with John McCain about the war in Iraq or a vote on
Yeah.
the floor." And you go, "Well, I wasn't prepared for that." So you would have to be prepared for everything, and no
Mm.
matter what the topic or subject is. So after doing the morning show, we would have a meeting to plan what's going to be on the next day, and then I would always be listening to news radio, and I would go home. If I had authors on the show the following morning, go through their books, Google the people to find out what their interests were that I was going to interview. So you're always constantly thinking about it and being prepared. It's almost like being prepared for a final exam every night because
Mm.
you have to know a little bit about everything. And so I was so consumed by that, I just kind of set that stuff with Ruth aside and just kept
Mm.
going forward.
That makes sense. And
Yeah.
just being, I haven't ever been married for 30 plus years, but I'm sure there are these just waves of coming together and going apart, and that's
Right.
normal. And, there's great times and there's tougher times, and maybe often there's no clear trigger for changes. It's just normal ebbs and flows, and that's what real relationships are. And
Right.
so it makes sense that you wouldn't necessarily hop on that and try to aggressively address it. But it
Right.
sounds like you were saying you kinda regret not doing that. Looking back,
Right.
with
I,
hindsight,
yeah, absolutely.
would you advocate for other, uh, especially married individuals, being direct about these kinds of things? They're sensitive because I could see someone getting defensive, the partner that's changing.
Yeah, sure, I would. But the thing is, this is insidious because
Yeah.
you don't know what's going on, you know? And believe me, in year 2001 or that time period, I didn't know much about Alzheimer's.
Mm,
I didn't know anything about never
mm,
even gave a thought to dementia. I mentioned that when we did this morning show, we would have a planning meeting every morning at 10:30 and we go over what they planned for the following day. Hey, what were people talking about? What subject should we bring up and all that? And in my 50 years of broadcasting, including the 30 years of Channel 10, I don't think Alzheimer's ever came up once or dementia ever came up once as a topic that needed to be addressed. And I can tell you why.
mm,
A lot of people don't realize this, but television stations, radio stations, they're businesses and their primary focus is to earn a profit. And they earn a profit by attracting an audience. And the audience that they need to have is what the advertisers need. And the advertisers want to attract young people. 18 to 49-year-old women mostly, and it's even younger than that. Every time a subject about aging or senior citizens or Sun City or it came up like that, and it was just poo-pooed. There was no enthusiasm for those types of topics. And
mm,
that's one reason why I wanted to write the book, because I thought when I was going through all this, no one knows about this. I mean, people like us, we're just average people trying to earn a living. And look at all the stuff you have to learn and know about and know what to do. And that was my reason for writing the book.
wow. Yeah, the people that know about it or knew about it then probably had family members, parents or grandparents that went through it. They're so busy with the caregiving part, they're not thinking of or trying to change the culture of media. They're too busy and stressed. Like that's
Right.
right. So luckily, I feel that is changing. Do you see that from your perspective?
Well, maybe, but I don't watch the media anymore.
Okay.
I watch national news, usually just an evening
Sure.
newscast.
Fair enough.
And I do see coverage on the national news when a new drug or research project underway, but they don't give it
Mhm.
a lot of,
Got it.
extensive coverage at all. As far as local news is concerned, if I ever have an opportunity to see anything local, whether it be the station I work for or the others, I never see anything like that.
Okay. Fair enough.
Yeah.
Maybe that's in my dream world for the future.
Yeah. Well, you have to approach them from the standpoint of this is how you could gain an audience, okay?
Mm,
Because you have young women mostly or young couples, and they may need to take care of their parent. See, and then you
yeah.
approach it from that angle, and
Yeah.
that
That
might
makes sense. It's impossible for people to think about themselves in 40 years.
right,
They can think about their parents, but that person's still separate from them. But to imagine your own self with Alzheimer's disease at 80 is
right.
almost impossible for people. So I did want to ask about what drew you to Ruth. I know she's absolutely gorgeous. Tell me more about that because, you obviously, what I saw was, and the energy between you is completely and utterly devoted to each other. And while she, I didn't realize she was the house manager, like doing everything pretty much while
Right.
you're, succeeding in your career. But yeah, tell me more about that.
Well, that day at the radio station in Ashtabula, Ohio, she's from that town, Ashtabula, Ohio. When I was, walking down the hallway with a friend we were talking and the door opened and it hit me in the face and I saw her and I fell in love with her immediately. She was the most beautiful woman I'd ever seen in my
Mm.
life. And I thought, well, she would never have anything to do with me. She would, want to go probably marry lawyers or doctors or,
Okay.
sports personalities. So I was really shy and I was shy to this very day, but that's probably one reason why I was in broadcasting. And, I wanted to ask her out, but I didn't have the nerve to do that. There were times when she would sit in the studio where the disc jockey was on the air because she was going with some other guy. And I would walk in there and just sit with them as a third party,
Nice.
make it uncomfortable for them. And then if she was in the lunchroom, I would go sit with her in the lunchroom. But I was embarrassed to ask her out. And there was this huge comedian at the time who was also a movie star. He was in movies with Robert De Niro. His name was Pat Cooper and he had a restaurant in Ashtabula that belonged to his in-laws or his family. And he used to come and be on our show. It was hilarious. And he was doing a big show in Cleveland and at this big nightclub in Cleveland. And he invited all the staff of our radio station to go and see him and spend time in the dressing room with him before the show and after the show and all that. And so I even invited part of my family to go too, but I was too shy to ask Ruth. So I had a friend of mine ask her and she said yes. And to this day, I don't know if she thought she was going out with him or me, but that was our first date. And then we started dating afterwards and, went to drive-in movies together and did a lot of things together. And we got married in May 2nd, 1969. And at that time, I had left that radio station and I was working in Cleveland, which is about 90 miles up the turnpike from there, up the freeway. So we moved back to Cleveland, which is my hometown. And so she immediately got a job as a reporter in a morning newspaper. And she was editing out newspaper pages and everything. And I was just beyond my comprehension how she was so talented and can do things like that. But she was very, very willing to adapt to the circumstances and to advance my career and not hers, which is pretty amazing nowadays when you think about things like that.
Huh.
When we moved we moved to Battle Creek, Michigan. And I don't know if are aware of this or not. It used to be that Battle Creek, Michigan was known as the cereal capital of the world
Oh yeah.
because of
Yeah.
Kellogg's and Post cereals and all
Yeah.
that. And they were all there. Kellogg's, Post cereals. You could smell them making the cereal in the morning, when you go to work. Well, she was a legal secretary. It was a prominent law firm downtown. And then she changed over to be in the engineering department, I said, of Post cereals. And she's pretty amazing, just amazing.
Yeah. So tell me what do you think or what do you know drew her to you and kept that? Like, what was that balance there?
I have no idea.
Well, I'm sure
Well,
she's told you.
that's the luckiest guy on the face of this earth.
Oh,
I know that wherever we went, she was a head turner. Everybody used to look at her and say, "Wow, she's a good-looking girl. How'd she get that guy?" No, I don't know. I guess maybe my personality, because she's shy too. But I don't know. I don't know what you were doing.
well, I mean, you were obviously you're a really great duo. I didn't realize you were both shy, firstly. Like that's blows my mind. She didn't seem shy to me either. She seemed so comfortable and maybe like reserved is like I could see that.
That would be a good term to use
Yeah.
for her. Reserved. Well, she came from a very small town in northeastern Ohio. Stabila, Ohio has a very large Finnish community. Finns there worked on the ore boats that went up and down the lake, and
Mhm.
her father worked in a factory. But yeah, just simple life in rural America.
Yeah. Yeah. Can I ask you about your book that you wrote about your experience? What led you to write that? At what point did you write that? Was that after she had passed away? And what was that process like for you?
Well, it just I mentioned earlier, it just struck me as crazy of these things that I had to learn, a learning curve to figure out what
Hmm.
to do and what not to do, and what was out there and what was available, what wasn't available, and who was doing what in the medical community. And I thought people have to know about this. And I don't care if I make one dime on this book. I'm going to put this book out and I'm going to tell everybody about it. It published in Wrote it in 2022. Ruth passed away October 21st, 2022. So I was writing it while she was still alive, at the end stage of her life. And it published in February 2023. People still buy it. Somebody just bought it yesterday. Maybe there were 15, 20 books sold in this past couple of weeks. And I don't promote it or anything. It's just out there,
Yeah.
you know. And it's not a million seller. It won't be on the New York Times bestseller list. An author who wrote a book about his journey and his wife's Alzheimer's and dementia journey, he contacted me a couple months ago, wanted to know if I would endorse his book. Yeah, sure. Not like I'm a published
Yeah.
famous author, but I wanted to outline what I went through and what I think people should do if they're confronted with the same problems that I was. For example, and I got a question about this last week when a physician says, "See you next year." Is that what you're supposed to do? I just let it go on its own? Isn't there anything that can be done? Because when we first saw you, I think one of the first things you did was you put her in physical therapy. Do you remember that?
Oh
And
yeah.
we were, and when we went to physical therapy, she was having a ball, and the physical therapist was amazing. We would all do it together. Okay, you're going to do this triceps exercise, and now you're going to do. We did a lot of strength training and balance, and she was also in occupational therapy as well. But there are so many things that can be done. And I had people coming to me and say, "Well, I got a diagnosis with a loved one, and what do I do?" They told me they didn't tell me to do anything or come back in a year. So I thought the book would help in that area. I also wanted to outline a little bit about ambiguous loss. I wanted to outline what it's like to be a caregiver and what I did and what resources were available back when the book was written in
Hmm.
22. And I thought that was very important. I'm not much of a researcher, although I did I did do some research on the book, but I just kind of like write from a stream of consciousness. And then, after you write your book, it goes through this editing process, which is like you're in high school in English class when you get a paperback and it's all marked up in red
Hmm.
marks. It was a tough process. It was agonizing, but I'm glad it's out there, and I'm glad it's doing some good. And I had somebody approach me last week, as I mentioned, and the mother in the family has Alzheimer's, and she's very combative. What do I do? Where do I go? Who do I see? I recommended you. I
Oh,
said, go see
yeah.
Dr. Dani Cabral, and they said they were going to get in touch. Some people just don't know what the first step is.
You mentioned ambiguous loss. Can you explain how you understand that and how that was helpful for you?
Yeah, a friend of mine, well, my closest friend passed away, well, about a couple months ago now, 2 months ago. And I spoke at his funeral, and his family was grieving. He had pancreatic cancer. And I told them that I know a little bit about grief because I went through this process with Ruth. And I told him what the big difference was with Ruth. And the big difference was Ruth was diagnosed, as we mentioned, in January of 2016. And little by little, 2016, 2017, she was still with us. I say around 2018, uh, it started to progress. She also had aphasia. And Northwestern University contacted us and wanted to know if they could do a research project with her on aphasia. And I said, well, I'd be willing. And they said, well, they need to interview you. And they interviewed me on the phone, and then they interviewed Ruth, and we failed. They couldn't do it because she couldn't talk, you know? And so because of the fact that she had aphasia, she was unable to speak. So through that process, and I don't know what year it was, maybe it was 2018, maybe it was 2019. That's when I lost her. She was
Yeah.
gone. And then her physical body
Yeah.
died on October 21st, 2022. And so when do you grieve, and why do you grieve? Do you grieve for losing her when she's still alive,
Mm,
or do you grieve after she's physically gone? Yeah, it's a problem. I don't think I'm over it yet.
sure. And you probably never will be
Right.
completely, but the way I think about it is it shifts where it's sitting in your brain and how close under the surface and
Yeah.
how likely you feel like you're gonna burst out crying, you know?
Right.
But, what would you have any for grieving? Would you have any practices or rituals when you notice, "Okay, there's this loss happening. I'm going to do my grief practice," or something?
I just cry.
Yeah. Yeah. Good. That's the
Sometimes you just
best.
burst out crying, you know? Somebody asked me, do you cry? Well, yeah, just about every day going through that process. The uh, was it 5 years? The first 5 years, I was her caregiver and very busy, and uh, I I put her in a daycare center, and in this daycare center, you would drop off your loved one and leave. And this was
Mhm.
after taking care of her for 5 years. Drop off
Mm,
your loved one and leave. Do you know what that's like on the very first day when you drop your kids off for kindergarten on the very first day and you're driving away and you're crying? And
yeah.
that was so hard for me. And she, didn't know what to do. When I would drop her off at this daycare center, the whole staff would gather around her and go, "Hey, Ruth's here." And everybody would be
Yeah.
applauding. They'd be making pancakes because they served them breakfast. And they would slowly kind of walk her away as I kind of backed out of the daycare center. So it wasn't an abrupt departure. And I had her in this daycare center a couple days a week, and it was good. They played games, they had Tai Chi. One day I was pulling up to pick her up, and a cowboy on a horse left. He came walking out of the daycare center on the horse
What?
with a banjo or a guitar. And he was in there entertaining. And so they did a lot of activities like that, which is good for her. But the primary reason for the daycare center for us was to give the caregivers respite. They had a nurse in that daycare center, RN. Her name was Amanda. I'll never forget her. She had this great English accent. And she sat in an office which was all glass and closed. And she would observe the patients as they were eating, as they were walking, as they were playing games. And she would keep in touch, and she would call me and say, one day she called and she said, "I'm observing Ruth. It looks like she has the Parkinsonism or Parkinson shuffle,
Yeah.
Parkinsonism shuffle as she walks." And she said, "You ought to get that checked out," which I did. And so they watched him very carefully. They also recommended, see, these are things you learn. There's certain utensils and dishes that you could buy for somebody that suffers from neurological disorders and dementia. I bought those things because they observed her eating, and
Mhm.
they thought, it would be advantageous to get that. So it was a good deal to have her in that. And in addition to this daycare center, they also had caregiver meetings where we could just share our challenges and stories. And they also had seminars on wills and trusts and latest developments in medicine and stuff like that. So yeah, it was very good. And so that gave me 2 days a week where I thought, I could be on my own, do whatever I wanted to do. So what did I do? I just went home and sat in the house alone. It wasn't much for me, but I think it was good for her.
Was that a break for you? Did you get some respite from that?
Yeah, but I didn't do much. I may have, gone to the gym or just sat in
Yeah.
the house. But yeah, I didn't. Yeah, it was good. It was good.
Thanks for sharing all of that. Including, there's so many things that came up with what you just said, including the benefits of specifically adult day programs.
Yeah,
I know a lot of families, and especially their loved ones with Alzheimer's or similar diseases, are reluctant to go to adult day programs.
right.
And there's different reasons. And a lot of times it's individuals who have that less insight that they're having these changes. And so they go to these places and they go, these aren't my people. And they might think inside of themselves, they're also much younger. So they're like, I'm a 40-year-old and I'm doing fine. And these are all old people who are just, like, that's not me. I don't need to be here. And so it certainly can be very challenging, and it can be a process. But I would say, and based on what you're saying, it's worth it to try. And those staff members and teams there are often really skilled at helping with that transition.
Right.
Yeah. Now, and also what you're bringing up, I would say, is how important community is to have. And that had a built-in different groups and resources that you could connect to and hear about. And then, so I hope that other families going through this would look into these things, but they are hard to find. Yes.
Well, one thing that you helped out with us a great deal was when you put me in touch with social workers who had a list, 4 or 5 pages of different programs, memory cafes, things to go and do with your loved one. I remember one which strikes me. I was very emotional. There's one program that was operated by the city of Phoenix here in Arizona, and it was a craft day session. It wasn't necessarily on a regular basis, but if you wanted to visit with caregivers, you would take your loved one and they would go into a craft room and they would do crafts, and we would sit at a conference table and discuss our problems and the challenges.
Mm-hmm.
The very first day, a guy said to me, "Is this your first day here?" And I said, "Yes, it is." He said, "Do you have children?" And I said, "Yes, I do." And he said, "Do you remember when your child came home from kindergarten and they drew a picture for you and it was a stick figure?" And I said, "Yeah." He said, "Well, that's what you're going to see here today." And that was really sad to see
Wow.
that. But it was very advantageous for me to discuss things with caregivers, and it was good for Ruth to get out and be
Mm-hmm.
with other people. She had a very close friend at that daycare center who passed away too. But Ruth did have aphasia, so she wasn't really, expressing her objection to anything. Another thing that I think was very important about that day center is they had a man whose job it is to place people into homes. He was like a consultant. And he would visit us at the daycare center. He'd visit us at the caregiver meetings. And great guy. And he was the person that they all recommended to use if you wanted to find a good home for your loved one. And so when it came time for Ruth to do that, I used him, of course. Now, I didn't mention that it was in January 2nd of 2021 or 2022, January 2nd, 2022, when Ruth fell and broke her hip.
Mm.
Day after New Year's. And we were in the kitchen and I had my back to her because I was, rinsing dishes,
Mm-hmm.
and she fell. She got up off the stool at the island and fell and broke her hip. Long story short, fire department came out. They were awesome. And took her to a hospital. And this was during the height of COVID. I was lucky even to get in the parking lot, and they called me in the middle of the night. The surgeons called me and they said, "We're going to have to operate on her hip. It's a fairly routine procedure." And he said, "Do you have any concerns?" He said, "We're about to go in the OR. Do you have any concerns?" And I said, "Well, yeah, my wife is an Alzheimer's patient. She has aphasia." I said, "I'm concerned about the anesthesia. Will that exacerbate it and make it worse?" And he said, "Well, I'll put the anesthesiologist on the phone," which he did. And I expressed this to him, and he said, "We'll do everything we can to mitigate that." So when she came out of surgery, she was, of course, unable to talk, but she was also unable to go to the bathroom. She was unable to eat,
Mm.
was unable to walk. They had to insert a feeding tube, and she wouldn't swallow anything, not physical therapists, but speech therapists, would try to get her to swallow,
Yeah.
and she wouldn't do that. So she was in the hospital a week, and that's when I decided that I had to put her into a home.
Mhm.
And a couple weeks later, we had her settled down into a home.
And it was a group home, from what I recall, right?
It was a group home. It was a good home for a while.
Mhm.
The lady that ran it was like a former nurse practitioner in Romania. And when I tell you she was excellent, she was above and beyond excellent. She would send me text messages every day. Ruth is doing this, Ruth is doing that. She'd take pictures of Ruth sitting out in the garden,
Mhm.
pictures of her with the Santa Claus and all that. And I would go visit her, drop in and see her 3-4 times a week, maybe even more. And she was great. But the thing about it, which really disappointed me, is she suddenly just up and disappeared. And new people were coming in and they weren't half as good as she was. And I come to find out that she sold the home and moved to Nashville, Tennessee to be in real estate.
Mm.
So yeah. So I called the Arizona Department of Health and I said, hey, the person that's in charge of inspecting these homes. And I said, can you do that? I mean, is that okay? And he said, let me tell you something. He said, a nursing home or a care home and running a care home, he said, it's a business real estate transaction. He said, they buy the home, fix it up so there's no more than 10 rooms. They can't do more than 10 rooms. And they rent out the rooms like it's an apartment. He said, although they do have to, their medical people are scrutinized by the state. He said, but it's a business decision. And the person that bought the home was a businessman who hired people to run it.
Yeah.
And I just knew that it wasn't good. And so the day that I decided to pull her out of that home, I was driving to Scottsdale to look at a new home that my friend was setting me up with, who he highly recommended. They called me from the old home, and the person that was running it said, Ruth is unresponsive. Her vitals are terrible, and we don't know what to do. What should I do? They asked me, and I said, call 911 and have the fire department call me as soon as possible. I'm on my way back. The fire department called me and they said, we transported her to the hospital, and they got into the nursing room and they said that she had COVID. As it turns out, everybody in that home had COVID in the old home. And so she was in the hospital for a week, met with the hospitalists and the doctors. They said that she has to go on hospice because she was on a feeding tube. And so I moved her into this new home and they did a good job. And I remember the first night she was there, the registered nurse called me late at night and said, Mr. D'Amico, you're going to have to make a decision as to take that feeding tube out. So I talked with my kids about it, talked with her sister, who they were very close, and we decided to remove the feeding tube, and she passed away a couple weeks later.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How was that to make that decision?
It was rough. And my oldest daughter, who was, we were visiting Ruth, all the kids were visiting Ruth almost every day, but my oldest daughter went berserk over it. And once we pulled the feeding tube out, Ruth was going through pain. And so they were giving her morphine. And my oldest daughter kept saying, give her more morphine. Give her more morphine. And the caregivers in the home said, the more morphine we give her, it'll exacerbate her death, passing away.
Yeah. It's a fine balance with
Yeah.
easing the pain and not stopping the respiratory drive.
Right. Exactly. So it was an ordeal,
Yeah.
It's over. And another thing, I thought after it's all over, I don't want to have anything to do with this anymore. I want to put this behind me. And I thought, well, maybe I'll move to the East Coast where I used to like sailboats, sailing, the water is warm because, in Southern California, the water is cold. And I thought maybe I just want to put this behind me, but no, I just thought I'd stay here and I'd visit. I have Ruth's remains buried in the National Memorial Cemetery because I'm a veteran, Air Force veteran. And I was visiting her every week for a while. I kind of backed off on that a bit, but so.
And from what I understand, you continue to be called upon to share your wisdom and experience with this field as we are today. So how is that for you? And you wanted to get away and put it all behind you.
Yeah, I guess it's just because, I'm, a former TV person and people know who I am and they know I've been through this. It's not as often as it used to be, but yeah, just as a matter of fact, I just told you just last week when people say Alzheimer's, well, talk to Rick D'Amico about that.
Mhm.
I guess that's okay. I haven't kept up with all the research and the studies and all that, as you have, obviously. The thing that really concerned me about it is it used to be, I guess it still is, the sixth leading cause of death in America, and the only one that has no treatment and no cure. And I remember what was it, Dr. Autry, who suggested the best thing you could do is get exercise, get plenty of sleep, and eat a Mediterranean diet. I thought, yeah, well, my grandmother used to tell me that when I was a kid. Is that all you got? And it's just like, I don't know, these pharmaceutical companies are doing these research projects. Nothing seems to be panning out. It's just been my experience, but I haven't kept up with it.
Yeah, we have had 2 drugs approved in the last 2 years for the
Yeah.
early symptomatic stages of Alzheimer's. However, I always say that you need all the other stuff available to patients and families, and that takes up a much more percentage of excellent care. I
Yeah.
call it psychosocial, spiritual, relational. And the fact that you got told come back in a year and all these people are coming to you and they don't know what to do, that needs to change. So that hasn't, from my perspective, changed significantly, and it's unacceptable, right?
Right. Yes.
No one should be going through this.
Yeah. And it was not only that medical institution that told Ruth to come back in a year, it was others too, because not me, but other people had told me that. They said, we got a diagnosis of Alzheimer's. I don't know if it was spouse or parent. And I said, well, what did the doctor say? They didn't say anything. They said, we'll make an appointment in a year, see how it progresses. That's still being done.
Yeah, yeah,
And
yeah.
it shouldn't, because that time period from diagnosis to whatever, the end, there's
Mm,
a quality of life issue that has to be addressed. And you could really pay attention and participate in the quality of life with your loved one until the very end. And
yeah,
that's
mm,
important. And people don't know.
yeah.
And people
Well,
don't know that these resources are available. I mean, people don't even know that there's a Arizona Caregivers Coalition who have they have funds available from the state legislature to help you with your
mhm,
caregiving and respite and financial situations that you might encounter.
mhm.
There are a lot of organizations out there that are doing good.
Yeah. Well, I'd love to. I'm going to include links to all of these things in the show notes to the Arizona Caregiver Coalition and a number of the other things you said.
Right.
Um, any any last words or things you want to share?
As a caregiver, I don't know if I'm an Alzheimer's patient yet, but if that happens, I'm going to call you right away.
I'm here. Yeah. You know where to find me.
I do, blank out every now and then. But as a caregiver, caregiving is not for the faint of heart. It's like you're a pro athlete, and
Mm,
it's rough, and you're doing it on a daily basis. But the uh, the rewards are just so gratifying and so rewarding to look back and say, I did this for my wife. It's very
mm,
important. Or my spouse.
beautiful. Well, thank you so much for your time and your wisdom and just
Hour already?
yeah, pretty
It's
much.
gone fast.
Yeah. How'd I do interviewing you?
Oh,
Switch.
you're really good. I'm not used to being interviewed. I'm
Yeah.
asking questions, and I always think, well, if I don't know what they're talking about, I can ask another question. And
Yeah. Great. Great.
yeah,
Well,
you're great. You're awesome.
thank you so much. So, thank you, everyone, for joining the Resilient Aging Unfiltered podcast. If you're watching on YouTube, please like and subscribe and comment. If you're listening on the podcast platforms, please follow the show, rate and review. We want to make sure we're getting all this information out. And so please check the show notes. And also, I know, Rick D'Amico, you have your online presence. So did you want to share where people can find you?
Oh, you could just go to Facebook. I'm on Facebook, Twitter. What's the other one? Truth Social.
Okay.
And then I do have a website. I don't do a lot with it. I do the motivational thought of the day, and I have links to my book on there, and that's rickdamico.com. If you go on Facebook, you just search for Rick D'Amico, and I'm sure I'll be there
Okay.
someplace. Or go to
Okay.
Amazon, buy my book.
Yeah. Yeah. Go to Amazon and we'll put in the show notes also the book and the links to the book. So
Okay.
thank you again. Have a great
Thanks.
day, everyone.
Thank you.